For this video, I'm going to do a crash course on Figma in 2025 and how you should be using it to design websites from scratch, including things like creating components, creating style guides, creating website sections, and then finally publishing them online. Let's begin. I'm going to take you through creating this design right here, which is one from Olga that you can download and access at any point in the description of this video. Here's an overview of what this video will look like. We'll begin learning Figma and creating a basic style guide like this one here. After that, we'll take a look at components, creating things like buttons and labels and reusable components we can use throughout the design. These components can then be customized with whatever styling you need. Lastly, we'll build out the design in full. This means creating auto layouts that we can then move about in our design and have something that we can actually take to a client to showcase. Once the design is done, I'll show you how easy it is to migrate it to a platform like Wix Studio so that you can also publish it online. Without wasting any more time, let's begin. Here is Figma. If you don't already have an account, sign up, otherwise sign in. Once you log in, you'll have a page like this. In order to create a new design, head to Designs on the top right here, and then you'll be greeted with this new blank canvas. On the right here, we have an inspector. On the bottom here, we have some tools, and on the left here, we have most of our layers and pages. First, let's update this page and call this Figma Web Design Crash Course 2025. On the left here, we have pages, and we are going to change this first page to Style Guide, and I'm going to create a new canvas on here. Now to do this, we're going to use the bottom left menu here, and we're going to select frames, and we'll see on the right hand side here, we have different examples like things like phones, tablets, for desktops. I'm just going to do a basic one here for wireframes, and it's just going to be this one, which is sized at 1440 x 1024 for the height and width. We can of course resize this around the sides, but I'm just going to leave it as a basic frame. We can also drag and drop it by holding the label just here at the top. Here on the left, I'm going to rename this frame layer to be called Style, and we'll add our first item, which is Typography, using the T at the bottom menu and clicking into our frame here and just writing the word Typography. It's pretty small right now, and if we were to resize it, it would only be the bounds in which this text is found. So we're going to select Scale from the bottom menu here and expand it out to be a bit larger. We can also change the font size if we wanted, but this is a useful feature that I often find myself using. Now I'll simply copy paste the element using Ctrl+C and Ctrl+P. I'll call this one Colors. I'll create a third one as well. I'll select maybe the text element here at the bottom, and it should reuse the same styling I had previously, but I prefer usually using copy paste. This last one will be called Illustrations, and maybe it'll include things like icons and things like that that would often reuse throughout the design. We are going to take a look at how to customize different elements. On the right, we have this inspector that lets us change different types of typography, the layout of text, as well as other features. I'll start by customizing these text elements here. I'm going to select one of them and change the typography to use the font Space Grotesque, and I'm going to apply these to all three. Now I want to create some of the header sections and the sizing that we'll have for them. I'll copy out this typography text, which is now using the right font family. I'm going to call this H1 header 1. I'll customize the size of this to be quite large, maybe something like 36 pixels, and the font family to be a medium weight in terms of how bold it is. Now to turn this into a reusable typography style. On the bottom right here in typography, I've got this section for text styling. Here under header, I've got some pre-made header sections, and I'm not going to use these just yet, but what I can do is create my own. Heading here, select the plus sign and label it. Here I'm going to label it H1 and create style. Now I've got this as a H1 style, which I can reuse. Let me do that again now, but for a H2 style. Here I'll create a text element called H2 header 2, create a new style, and call this one H2. There's only one issue. We forgot to change this sizing. I'm going to unlink the styling and then change the font size to maybe 24 pixels. And I'll go to recreate the styling, but we already have a H2 element here, so I'll right click on this one and then select to delete it. Now I can recreate it by selecting the plus sign once more and calling this H2. Here's the style now. I can edit the style by just selecting the option over here and selecting edit style, and this is often faster than deleting and recreating it. I'm going to go ahead and recreate all the other headings, so you usually want to have heading 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which decrease in size at each increment. This takes care of our basic typography. Now let's take a look at colors. I'm going to select the box icon here to create a rectangle, and I'm going to just create one here. I'm going to hold down Shift so it's a perfect square, and here we'll have our first box for a color we can select. I want to have 3 main colors: the primary, secondary, and tertiary, or sometimes foreground, accent, and background. So I'll just copy paste this box out, but if you want, you can manually select it. And Figma is pretty good at adding these rulers and guiding lines to make sure that everything is sized and spaced quite neatly. Now that I have these, I can select the first one, and on the bottom right here in Inspector, I've got colors which I can select from. Right now I'm on the red, but I can move over here, for example, to a teal or a green and select the right color I want to use as my primary color. I'm taking this green here, and I've got a specific hex decimal which I'm going to copy paste here at the bottom, and here you can see that nice lime green color for the primary color. The secondary will be a black color. I'm just going to copy paste this hex decimal on the bottom right here, and the final one will be a background color, which is just an off-white, which is this gray F3 color. It's also useful to have a actual text element on top of these colors so you know what hex value they are. I'm just going to copy the colors text here, and I'm going to copy out the hex value and paste it here into the color. I'm also going to group these 2 elements on the left hand side together by right clicking and selecting group selection, or you can press Ctrl G as well as a shortcut. I'm going to call this primary color, and these 2 now, since they're in a group, will essentially be draggable together, and I'm going to start styling them and creating variables for them. So let's do that now. On the right side here, we have our color selections, and we've got our different types of styling that we can do from the colors too. So I'm going to create a new style for the color green here. I'm going to call this primary color. This is now stored as a color variable. So if we select it, we can see selected colors is primary color. I'm going to go ahead and do the same for the secondary and the background color. Finally, I'm also going to add labels for these. So for the background color, I'll add the hex value, and for the secondary color, I'll also add in the hex value for that too, so we can pull that out at any point if we need to. This is the basics of a style guide, and these are the essentials. With these done now, we can start creating components like buttons. To do this, I'll create a separate page here. So on the left, I'll select the plus button, call this page components. I'm going to change the background for this page to be something more of an off-white so that we can see the components we make a bit more clearly. The first component I want to create is a button. I'm going to select the rectangle tool here, and I'm going to create a basic shape, essentially like a rectangle that'll be the shape of a button, and change its background to be one of the styles we had earlier. Normally they'll appear on the bottom, but first we'll pull them out of our library here, which is that secondary color. Next, I'll use the text tool, and I'm going to create the text for the button. I'm just going to call it button and place it here on top. I'll change the background here to be the off-white color that we're using. And here I'm just going to center it right in the middle of the button. It'll align and snap into place. I can then group this and call this group button. I always prefer to set the group names immediately, because if you don't, then you might end up with like hundreds of groups and you won't know what is what. Here for the button on the right hand side inspector, I can change the border radius here from things like 5, 10, 15. I think I'm going to set it at 10 pixels because it has these nice rounded corners. And with that done, we can now turn this into a component. If you right click and head down to the bottom of the options, you've got create component. It turns it into this kind of like a React component, which you can now reuse all over your designs. And whatever changes you make to the original will be updated to all the others. If you want to cancel that, you can always right click and deattach instance, which sets it back to an original component. Here I've copy paste one out, and this one now is deattached, so it's not updating from the original. Now let's create a set of components. I'm going to copy paste this one here below as a button, and I'm going to customize some of the styling. First, I'm going to have a stroke around this button, so it's going to be like an out-align variation for a button design, and I'm going to remove the background color so that it just has the text with the outline. I'll also update the text now to be the dark color rather than the gray color. But right now I've done the stroke on the entire group rather than just the rectangle itself. So I'm going to double click and select just the rectangle so that the stroke can be applied on just this element rather than the group itself. With that done, you might think that now we need to right click and select create component. But if we do that, we're going to be creating both of these elements as a single component, and that's not exactly what we want to do. Instead, we want to have this as its own set of components that are kind of combined into a super component where we can choose different variations. On the top right here, we can select create multiple components. Now we've got two individual components that are slightly different. I'll just label the second one as secondary button. And now that we have these, we can select both of them and create variations. Here on the right, we have combine as variations, and you can see a huge supergroup above them called component one. And this is the original component name, and the variations are underneath. I'll call the main one button and the variations secondary button and primary button. If we head over to assets and search up button now, we'll see that component exists. We can drag it into our design anywhere. And on the right hand side, we've got variation 1 and 2, which we can change. And we can still change things like the original design and it's updated in our variation. Or you can go ahead and update some of the text inside of the button and it doesn't break the variation, since this is sort of like a variable you can modify. I'm going to go ahead and paste some of the components I made earlier, and you can download these directly from this source file or just remake them yourself as some practice. Now let's begin the fun part, actually designing a website. I'll start off by creating a new page here called web design. And the first thing I want on here is a layer called homepage. I'm going to make it the size of a desktop and I'll label this one homepage. And it's where we're going to start creating things like the hero section, the navigation, and things like that. We're going to do this by creating a number of frames using auto layout. Let's create the very first one here for the navigation. I like to make these all separate and then they can be just dragged straight onto the homepage design. The first one here is the navigation one, and right now it's not very visible. So for the time being, while we're working in draft, just so you see, I'm going to add a stroke around it so that you can visualize exactly how it's working. I'll create this as an auto layout. These are essentially like using Flex if you've ever used that in web design, and it's a pretty simple concept where different elements will just end up being auto-arranged in the order we set them. Now, to create the logo, I'm just going to create a frame here for the logo, and earlier in the components, I had an asset called logo. If you haven't got this, you can also download it from the description below. I'll drag this here into that frame, and now let's move on to making the menu. For the menu, I'll create a brand new frame here and set this as an auto layout as well. And I'll label this one menu. Here for the menu, we're going to start adding different types of text elements. The first one being the home page. So I'm going to type in home here, resize this to maybe a H4 or H5 block, and then drag this into the auto layout. You'll see that it automatically changes the width and height of this frame. And every time I copy paste out another element, it automatically updates. This is essentially how auto layouts work. And we're going to customize these to essentially work a little bit better in terms of the layout right now, since it's a little bit too small. On the right hand side here, you'll notice that we have a number of options to change how these items on the menu are laid out. Right now, I'm going to center everything in terms of its position and add some padding on the left and right hand side and top and bottom. This allows it to have some more room to breathe, and you can already see how that's taken effect. I definitely recommend playing around with these settings, as it's the best way to get familiar with how they all work. The main setting I normally like to change is just how much space is between each one of the elements, which is this 40 value right here. With all this done, we can now start moving some of these layers into our navigation auto layout. And we can do this by simply dragging and dropping it until we see this blue line on the left. Since this is running as auto layout or flex, then you can see the positioning of it isn't great. So I'm going to select a center here to make sure that all of it is aligned. I'm also going to give it some additional padding on the left and right hand side and select this section here to have a height of 100 pixels or maybe something like 80. I can also customize the spacing between different elements, like the logo and the text for the menu items themselves. It's currently 10, I'll set it to 40, but actually I think auto is the best, since this way it adjusts automatically, making sure that the logo is on the left and the menu is on the right. Hopefully you're starting to see just how useful auto layouts are when it comes to Figma and design. Let me add a contact us button here by selecting a secondary button, customizing the text here to something like call us, and then adding this into the layouts. Now, I don't have a frame for this. I always like to have all items in frames when I'm adding them to auto layouts, just so you have more control over how they are positioned. And I'm going to copy paste this one here as an auto layout for the call us button and then drag this into the design. You'll notice now that the menu is in the middle, the call us is on the right, and the logo is on the left. While I could move this element onto the home page, it's more going to be like an absolute position with its position fixed. So instead, let's turn the home page homepage into an auto layout as well. Rather than rows, I'm going to make the homepage have columns, and it's going to essentially have each item going downwards rather than to the right. You'll notice that the navigation is actually a little bit bigger than the homepage. And if I expand out the homepage, it's not adjusting the size of its component. So I can center its position, but a better way is to just make sure that the auto layout is using auto for the width. So that way it automatically adjusts the homepage as well as the menu to the width we're providing. You may notice that the menu is in the middle, and this is because of auto layouts. And here I want it to be aligned on the right hand side next to the Contact Us button. In order to achieve this result, I'm actually going to have to move these out of the navigation and then create a separate auto layout specifically for them with its own frame. So I'm going to call this Menu and Contact Us, and this auto layout will allow us to have these two elements blocked together. So when we add them back to the homepage navigation, the logo will be on the left and the Contact Us and menu will be on the right. Let's actually drag these in, and sometimes if you can't find the right spot to drag them in, you can actually go on the layers on the left hand side and just nest them together under the Menu and Contact Us main auto layout. You can see the alignment isn't from the center, so let me update that, and now I should be able to just drag them here into the menu. It's not exactly how I want, so I'm just going to drag them manually through the layers option just here. Now that they're in place, I can just drag them left and right, and we have these auto layouts working perfectly for this homepage, and we can even resize the homepage now and they'll adjust accordingly. I'm going to go ahead and create the main hero section now. And for this, I'm going to also use auto layouts, but show you another way to use them, which is a little bit simpler and faster, but I still prefer creating frames. You can go ahead and just create text elements like this, which is the H1 block I'm creating. I'll make sure that I use the text style of H1 that we set earlier and resize it so it breaks a couple of the lines so it uses up some vertical space. What I'll do next is add a paragraph here. I haven't set a typography per paragraph, so I'm just going to use the H4 block for now, but ideally we should have set a paragraph styling earlier in our typography. You can go back and do that now if you want. I'll adjust the horizontal space to be the same as the H1 block, and I'll drag in the button we created earlier. Now the simplest way to create an auto layout. Just select all three elements and select Add to Auto Layout. This automatically creates a frame here which has the spacing for an auto layout ready, and all we have to do now is rename it to what we want. I can now customize this frame. I can expand it out, and all the items inside should expand out automatically. There is some spacing between each. Right now this text block, for example, is using too much space, so I'm going to get it to hug its container. And for example, now if I expand it out, you can see that the spacing is working a lot better. I'm going to paste in an image here since I want to create two different elements for the homepage. You can grab this image from the description of my video, and it's just this image of a speaker, and I'm going to place it to the right hand side of the hero text. I can select both of these now and create an auto layout between the two, creating a frame that exists between them right here. And I can now drag this into our homepage and it'll appear just here. It's not using all the width, so I'm going to select to use the full container. I'm also going to align it to the center, so you can see now it's fitting in quite well. I could expand out the vertical width, but I'm just going to get it to hug its content, and I'm just going to add some padding from the left and right hand sides. Later, we can use auto layout to display things vertically as well as horizontally, for example, if we were building out a mobile version, but for the time being, I just want to create this version here for the desktop. Depending on the image you use and the text and how long the description and title are, you can play around with the spacing of each one of the elements until they fit the container they're in nicely and neatly so that there's still some room to breathe, adding some negative space. Now I want to customize this button here to say book an appointment. The issue right now is this button doesn't have enough space to fit the text and the line breaks. If we head back to our components, we can customize how this component is laid out so that this works properly. Head over to components and head to the button here. This time what I'm going to do is expand out the text so it uses the full space of the button and then center it. So it essentially works the same way, but now if I expand it out in my design here, you can see that book a consultation actually fits in properly. I want to create the sponsored section now. Paste in the sponsored logos, which should be available in the description of my video, and we're going to create a brand new section over here on the homepage for them. In order to do this, I'm going to set up a brand new frame, which I'm going to convert into an auto layout and have them all sitting next to each other in a kind of flex layout. Let me select this one over here and change it to an auto layout and start dragging in the logos to this frame. And you'll see that right now they'll just appear vertically aligned. And we'll update this in a second. I just want them all in there and show you how we can customize this auto layout to work the way we want. First, I want to set the alignment here to be horizontal rather than vertical. I'll expand out this frame to the far right and start customizing it. Here, I'll change the height to be hug contents. The width, while I could do hug contents, I just wanted to use the full width for the time being. Next, I want to have everything aligned in the middle, and I want padding on the left and the right of about 100 pixels. Next, I want to add some space between each one of the elements. So here, I'm going to give them about 50 pixels of padding or gap between each item, though I would maybe prefer if they use all the horizontal space. Another option is for it to just use the auto setting, which lays it out automatically from left to right, and you can see that's aligned quite well. Now I can just drag it into the frame. Unfortunately, sometimes this doesn't drag perfectly, so instead I'm just going to use the layers on the left-hand side to drag it into the home page. I'll update the width now to just use the fill container, and now I can simply shrink or expand out my home page, and the design adapts accordingly. These are the design fundamentals to create any element in Figma, and with this you should be able to replicate the rest of the design, so I'm not going to go through and show you every single part of this, but hopefully you can do this in your own time. Instead, what we're going to do is go ahead now and convert this into an actual website by moving it to a low-code, no-code website builder. Heading to Google, I'm going to search up Wix Studio, which is what we'll be using. It's a no-code website builder I've been using for the last couple of years that not only has drag and drop, but you can still jump into all the code of the website itself, and it's probably one of the easiest to get started with. Once I log into the dashboard, I'm going to head to the top right and create a brand new site from a blank canvas. And I'm going to use one of the new features which allows me to import directly from Figma. Here's my blank canvas. What I'm going to do is go to the top left and then head to Tools and Import from Figma. I'll need to paste the URL of the Figma link. So I'm going to head back to my page here, go to the address bar and copy out the URL and paste it here. Then select Connect. This connects it to the Figma design, and now all I have to do is run the Figma to Wix Studio plugin. So let me do that now. Heading back to the design, I'm going to right click on the homepage, go to Plugins and run Figma to Wix Studio. Here I'll prepare to export the design. I'll select Setup Export. I've already connected the URL, so I can select Next here. Then I can click Start Export. I'm going to export the styles first by selecting Export Styles, which pulls out all the colors and typography. Then I'll go to Export Design, and I'll just simply select to use the same frame that I was designing in earlier. And that's it. Heading back to Wix Studio, I'm going to select Refresh Import. Here you'll see the style guide as well as the design available on the left-hand side, and I'm going to select Add to Site. It imports the entire Figma design straight into Wix Studio exactly how we created it. And since we used auto layouts, all the sections are created in that same manner. You can see here the sponsored section, the hero section, the menu and nav bar. It even resizes according to how we set it earlier. Publishing the website online is one of the easiest steps. Just head to the top right, select Publish, and then click Save and continue. Here's the online URL, and you can see the website is now up and running. Not bad for just a couple of minutes to get it from a Figma design into a low-code builder. However, I do recommend customizing it a little bit because a few things might not work exactly perfect, such as responsive design, as well as small things like the SVG imports, which have lost their grayscale that they originally had. If you've created a really good design, you should be able to just select a section and select the purple stars over here to use responsive AI and generate a responsive design immediately, just using AI magic that is built into Wix Studio. And while this is great if you've designed the Figma design perfectly, sometimes you'll find that small things like SVGs don't adapt properly. So I'm also going to show you how to properly update the responsive design so that it works properly. Here, for example, we have our hero section, which the design doesn't really adapt when you go to a tablet or a mobile viewport. On the tablet viewport, I'm going to head over to this section and change it from a horizontal to a vertical space. And here you can see that I can now expand it out using maybe the inspector on the right hand side to have 100% width, And we've got a slightly different design for tablet. I might not want this giant image on the bottom, and I want to update also the text on the top. For example, this button's too large, so I'm just going to shrink it down a bit. And these design changes only apply to the viewport you're on and ones below it. So we shouldn't worry too much about the desktop view. Here, for example, this image, I might not want to use it because it doesn't really work very well as independent SVG layers. So I'm just going to hide the entire image shape, and I'm just going to have the text for the tablet viewport and the mobile viewport. So here you can see it's adapting a lot cleaner. I'm going to go ahead and update the logos for the sponsors as well to work for a tablet and mobile viewport to have them expanded out a little bit more vertically rather than horizontally. And the next section I want to customize is this one over here for services. You can see here for the mobile view, it's not using all the width. So I'm going to change this section here to remove some of the padding, make sure that it uses the full width of this section, and expand out the text and the title section so that it properly is utilizing that space. Since Wix Studio uses very familiar layouts with an inspector very similar to Figma, it's pretty easy to update these to work the way I want. In the tablet viewport, you can see the services is way too large, while the text paragraph on the right is a little bit too small and using too little space. So what I'm going to do is remove some of the padding on the right once more. And then for the services title, I'm going to shrink down the text a little bit so that it's not as large and it fits in a lot more with our design. Heading over to text on the right here, I'm just going to set it to be something like paragraph 5 and shrink down its vertical space. This looks much better. With this done, we've got a good design for the mobile, the tablet, and the desktop viewports, and it's something that could now be taken to a client and is pretty close to a proper release. I hope you guys learned a lot from this Figma crash course on how to utilize Figma's latest techniques from components to auto designs and how to make web designs like this one here. If you want to download it, here is the link in the description, as well as how you can access all the assets. Additionally, if you want to learn a little bit more about Wix Studio, I've also added a link in there below for you to be able to use that too.